This podcast episode was generated using artificial intelligence. As a result, you may notice a few pronunciation artifacts throughout the recording. In particular, the word lead may occasionally be pronounced as lead, GAMI may be spoken as GMI, and references to the Eagle program may sound like EG or similar variations. These minor mispronunciations are a byproduct of the AI generation process and are not intended to detract from the substance of the discussion. The information, context, and perspectives presented remain accurate, relevant, and worth your time. If you have questions about any websites, references, or materials mentioned during the podcast, links and source documentation are provided in the podcast's content information for your review. We encourage you to focus on the content being delivered, as the insights and analysis are far more important than these occasional audio imperfections. Thank you for listening, and we hope you find the discussion informative and valuable.
Today, to see the future, we actually have to look up, way up.
Right.
And we have to look back in time about 50 years.
It really is a time warp. It's one of those topics where once you see it, you just can't unsee it, or maybe you can't unsmell it.
I love that. Let's just start with the premise, because when I first started reading the stack of documents for this deep dive, I genuinely thought there was a typo in the date.
I believe it.
I really did. I thought I was reading a report from, 1978. Because if I told you, listener, that there is a massive fleet of vehicles moving across the United States right now, literally overhead as we speak, that is burning leaded gasoline.
Actual tetraethyl lead.
Actual tetraethyl lead. You'd probably tell me I'm crazy. You'd say, we banned that. We fixed that in the 80s.
It is the great anachronism of modern life. It really is. We think of lead as this Victorian-era poison or something from the mid-20th century that we solved with the catalytic converter in cars.
Right.
But in aviation, it never left.
It never left. And just to be clear, we are not talking about a few hobbyists flying antique biplanes on the weekend.
No, not at all.
We are talking about the backbone of general aviation. The Cessnas, the Pipers, the Beechcrafts, the planes that train new pilots, the planes that transport medical supplies, the ones that inspect pipelines. They're all still filling up with a fuel called 100 low lead.
And that name, 100 low lead, is such a marketing masterpiece, isn't it?
It sounds so benign.
It implies safe. But low it's a very relative term. It's low compared to the ultra-high lead military fuels of World War II, maybe.
Yeah.
But compared to unleaded automotive gas, it's incredibly toxic.
And here is the statistic that it stopped me in my tracks. I want to make sure I get this right from the EPA report. Piston engine aircraft are now the single largest source of lead emissions in the U.S. air.
By a massive margin. It's not even close.
They contribute 70% of the lead entering the air annually in the United States.
It's a staggering number. And think about that for a second. We've spent decades and billions of dollars removing lead from paint, from plumbing, from our cars.
Yeah.
And we succeeded for the most part. So now the only major source left is this one specific sector of aviation.
It's like we've cleaned the entire house but left a pile of toxic waste in the attic.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that's what creates this incredible tension, which is really the heart of our deep dive today.
Exactly. On one side, you have the absolute imperative of public health. We know the science has settled lead makes people, especially kids, sicker and, frankly, dumber. It attacks the brain.
No question.
But on the other side, you have flight safety. You have hundreds of thousands of aircraft engines that were designed in the 1950s and 60s that rely on that lead to keep from exploding in midair.
Right. And that is not an exaggeration. We need to be very clear about that. If you take the lead out without a proper certified replacement, the engine destroys itself.
And if that happens at 500 feet after takeoff?
Gravity takes over. It's as simple as that. So you have the standoff, poison the air, or risk falling out of the sky.
So that is our mission for today. We're going to unpack the EGL initiative, which is this huge government industry roadmap to finally fix this problem by 2030.
It's a massive undertaking.
We're going to look at the contenders, these new fuels that are fighting for market share. And we are going to tell the story of one specific airplane, a Beechcraft Baron, that became, I think it's fair to say, the most scrutinized test subject in aviation history.
Oh, absolutely. It's a fascinating story of chemistry, bureaucracy, and logistics. And as we'll see, the engineering part. That might actually be the easy part. It's the logistics that are the nightmare. Okay, so let's dig in. Section 1. The catalyst. Why are we even talking about this in 2026? We've known lead is bad for decades. Why is the pressure mounting right now?
It all traces back to a very specific regulatory trigger. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, issued what is called a final endangerment finding.
That sounds like a sci-fi movie title, the endangerment finding.
It does sound incredibly dramatic, but in the world of administrative law, it is the nuclear option. This falls under Section 231A of the Clean Air Act.
Okay.
And essentially, the EPA administrator went on the record and finalized a determination that says lead emissions from aircraft engines cause or contribute to air pollution that endangers public health. It's a formal legal declaration.
Okay, but the EPA releases reports all the time. They're full of maybes and further study required. Why is this one different? What makes it a nuclear option?
This one is different because of the legal mechanism it triggers. The Clean Air Act is very, very specific.
Yeah.
Once the EPA makes an official endangerment finding, it isn't a suggestion anymore. It isn't a recommendation.
That's a mandate. It strips away the option of doing nothing. It legally compels the EPA to then set emission standards, and it legally compels the FAA to enforce them. It starts a clock that cannot be stopped.
So it shifts the entire conversation from, we should really get around to this someday,
to we are going to get sued by environmental groups if we don't fix this starting now.
Right.
It forces the gears of two massive and very different bureaucracies, the EPA and the FAA, to mesh together. And you have to understand, they have very different primary mandates.
Sure. The EPA's job is to protect health and the environment.
Right. And the FAA's job is to keep planes from crashing. And on this one issue, those two goals have been in direct conflict for decades. This finding forces them to find a single path forward.
Let's talk about that health context for a second, because I think there's a tendency for people to say, oh, it's just small planes, they're flying up high, the wind blows it all away. But the EPA document was pretty damning on this.
It was unequivocal. And that's because the science has evolved. Maybe 20 or 30 years ago, we might have thought there was a safe level of lead exposure. A little bit is okay.
A tolerable threshold.
Exactly. The current scientific consensus, which is cited all over the finding, is that there is no evidence of a threshold below which lead causes no harmful effects.
So 0 is the only safe number.
0 is the only safe number. And the effects are so insidious. We're not talking about acute poisoning where you keel over. We're talking about the permanent impact on cognitive development in children.
Things like IQ reduction.
IQ reduction, attention deficits, problems with academic performance. And when you look at the geography of these airports, that's where it really hits home. General aviation airports aren't usually way out in the middle of the desert.
No, they're in the suburbs. They were built in the 40s, and the suburbs grew up right around them.
Precisely. They are surrounded by houses, schools, parks. Reed Hillview Airport in California is the poster child for this. It's smack in the middle of San Jose. There are studies showing elevated lead levels in the blood of children living nearby. So the EPA is saying, we can't ignore this anymore. The data is too clear.
So the EPA drops this hammer. Does that mean the pumps shut off tomorrow?
Yeah.
Is 100 low lead now illegal?
No. And that's a critical distinction. The endangerment finding doesn't instantly ban the fuel. If it did, you would ground the entire general aviation system overnight. It would be chaos.
The whole system would just stop.
It would stop. So instead, it creates a regulatory timeline. It forces the industry to invent, certify, and distribute a solution before the government ultimately bans the problem.
Okay, let's look at the scope of that problem. I want to be crystal clear for the listener. When you and I get on a Delta flight to Europe or a United flight across the country, are we burning lead?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Commercial jets, your Boeings, your Airbuses, they use jet fuel.
Which is basically kerosene.
Exactly. It's very similar to diesel fuel. It has never, ever had a lead in it. We are talking specifically about the piston fleet.
Which is, how many planes are we talking about here?
In the United States alone, it's about 220,000 aircraft.
That is a massive fleet.
It's the largest and most diverse general aviation fleet in the world. And they consume, according to the latest data, about 176 million gallons of 100 low lead annually.
176 million gallons. Wow. That is a lot of lead being aerosolized over the country.
It is. And that consumption isn't spread out evenly. It's highly concentrated in a few areas. If you look at the map from the FAA documents, Florida's number one. They burn over 20 million gallons a year.
That's through flight training, right?
It's almost all flight training. You have great weather year-round, so the schools are just constantly flying. After that, you have California at number 2 and Texas at number 3. So those 3 states are really the heavy hitters in this story.
So this brings me back to the question I think every non-pilot is asking right now. I drive a car. My car runs on high-octane premium unleaded. My lawnmower runs on unleaded. Why is my neighbor's Cessna so picky? Why can't we just go to the Shell station, fill up a can of V-Power, and pour it in the plane?
That is the million-dollar question. And it comes down to the physics of these very specific engines. Aircraft engines, especially the high-performance ones that burn most of this gas, are a different beast. They're air-cooled, they have large-bore cylinders, and they run at very high compression ratios.
So they run hot, and they run hard.
Extremely hot and hard. And because of that, the fuel needs to be incredibly resistant to something called detonation.
Which is engine knock, right?
It's a much more violent version of engine knock. In your car, if you use low-grade fuel in a high-performance engine, you might hear a pinging or knocking sound. The car's computer has a knock sensor. It hears it. It immediately retards the ignition timing, and you lose a little bit of power. No big deal.
But a 1960s Continental engine in a Cessna doesn't have a computer.
Correct. No computer, no knock sensor, no way to automatically adjust itself in real time. If detonation happens in an aircraft engine, which is basically the fuel-air mixture exploding uncontrollably instead of burning smoothly, it creates a massive, instantaneous pressure spike, a shockwave inside the cylinder.
It's like hitting the top of the piston with a sledgehammer.
Exactly. While it's trying to move up on the compression stroke, the forces are enormous. It can melt the piston, you can blow the cylinder head clean off, or it can seize the entire engine. And this can happen in seconds.
And if that happens during takeoff, which is when the engine is under the most stress...
You become a glider at 200 feet above the ground. And that is not a survivable situation in most cases.
So lead, this tetraethyl lead, is the magic ingredient that stops the hammering.
For 70 years, it has been the magic ingredient. It is the cheapest, most effective, and most chemically stable octane booster ever discovered. It slows down the combustion front just enough to prevent that violent explosion. It's an incredible chemical. It just happens to be a potent neurotoxin.
So the challenge isn't just taking the lead out. It's finding something to put in that does that exact same job of preventing detonation, protecting the engine under extreme heat and pressure without poisoning the people on the ground.
That is the chemical puzzle.
Yeah.
And there's another piece. It has to be compatible with engines and fuel systems designed 70 years ago. You can't ask 220,000 aircraft owners to go out and buy brand new engines. That would cost tens of billions of dollars and bankrupt the industry.
It has to be a drop-in replacement.
It must be a drop-in replacement, and that is a very, very high bar.
Which brings us to the EGLE.
The EGL initiative.
EAGLE, which stands for Eliminate Aviation Gasoline Lead Emissions. As far as government acronyms go, that's top tier. I like that one.
It's strong, it's memorable, and it represents this public-private partnership between the FAA, the big aviation industry associations like AOPA and EAA, the fuel producers, and the airport managers. Everybody is at the table.
And they set a deadline, a hard deadline.
They did. The goal is a completely lead-free national aviation system by the end of 2030.
We are sitting here in early 2026. That is less than 5 years away. In aviation terms, where certification for a new Bolt can take a decade, that feels ambitious.
Ambitious is an understatement. It's a dead sprint. As you mentioned, there is a special exception for Alaska. They get an extension to 2032, and we can talk about why later. But for the lower 48 states, the target is 2030.
Now, reading through the EGLE initiative presentations, it seems like this isn't just one single path to the finish line. They've set up what they call two pathways for a new fuel to get approved.
Right, and this is a really important structural detail to understand how this is all unfolding. You have the fleet authorization path, which is also called PAAI, and then you have the STC path.
Let's break those down. PAFI first, what's that?
PAFI stands for the Piston Aviation Fuels Initiative. So this is the government-led, more traditional collaborative track. You can almost think of it as designed by committee. The FAA and all the industry partners work together to test different fuel candidates to see if they can find one single solution that the FAA can then authorize for the entire fleet all at once.
So if a fuel wins the PAFI competition, the FAA just waves a magic wand and says, everybody can use this fuel, effective immediately.
That's the idea, essentially.
Yeah.
A universal fleet-wide approval. Currently, they are deep in testing a fuel from a partnership between LyondellBasell and VP Racing. It's called UL100E. They're aiming to finish all that testing around the spring of 2027.
Okay, so that's the slow and steady government committee track. But then there's the STC track. What does STC stand for?
Supplemental Type Certificate.
And what does that mean?
This is the private market track. This is the more entrepreneurial, move fast and break things approach. A private company says, I'm not going to wait for a committee. I think I've cracked the code. I'm going to invent my own fuel. I'm going to run all the tests myself, and I'm going to bring my mountain of data to the FAA and prove to them it works.
And if they succeed?
If they succeed, the FAA gives them an STC, which is basically a permission slip. The company can then sell that permission slip, along with their fuel, to individual aircraft owners, allowing them to legally use that new fuel in their specific plane.
And this STC path, this is where all the action is right now, because we actually have contenders in the market.
We do. The race is on, and it's fascinating to watch.
So who is in the lead? No pun intended.
Well, depending on how you measure it, the company that's furthest ahead on paper is a company called GAM. That's GAMI. It stands for General Aviation Modifications, Inc.
And their fuel is G100UL.
Correct. And they achieved a massive, massive milestone a little while back. They were the first to get what's called an Approved Model List, STC, an AML STC.
Which means?
It means their STC covers, for all intents and purposes, every single spark ignition, piston engine, and airplane in the entire U.S. registry. It's a blanket approval. So technically, legally, as of today, you could put G100UL in almost any piston engine plane.
So the problem is solved. Why isn't this deep dive over? Why isn't G100UL at every airport in America?
Because inventing a fuel in a lab is one thing.
And making millions of gallons of it is another.
It's a completely different problem. It's the scale problem.
Yeah.
Right now, G100UL is barely available. It's at a handful of airports, a couple in California, Reed Hillview, Watsonville, and, for reasons I'm sure make sense in a logistics plan somewhere, Tupelo, Mississippi.
Tupelo, Mississippi.
But for the most part, it's a ghost. Their production partner is a big company called Vital Aviation, and so far they've produced about 1.3 million gallons.
1.3 million. And you said the U.S. burns 176 million gallons a year.
So they have manufactured less than 1% of the annual demand.
It's a drop in the bucket.
It's a drop in a very large bucket. They have the legal key, but they haven't built the factory to make the cars yet, so to speak.
Who else is chasing them? Who's the competition?
The other major player is a company called Swift Fuels. Their product is called 100R, and they're taking a slightly different, maybe more pragmatic approach.
How so?
They didn't go for the whole fleet at once, blanket approval. They're getting approved on a more granular basis.
Yeah.
SEC for this engine and SEC for that airframe.
So they're going plane by plane, engine by engine. Isn't that a lot slower?
It can be. But their strategy seems to be targeting the highest volume planes first, the workhorses. The Cessna 172s, the Piper Archers. These are the planes that flight schools use.
The ones that are flying 8 hours a day, every day.
Exactly. The planes that actually burn the majority of the gas.
Yeah.
And Swift seems to be moving very fast on the production and logistics side. Just last year, in September 2025, they got their ASTM production specification.
Which is a big deal.
It's a huge deal. ASTM is the international body that sets standards for fuels. Having that spec means any refinery can, in theory, blend their fuel to a consistent, reliable standard. It's the gold standard for quality control and large-scale production.
And I see here in the notes that a big flight school, the San Carlos Flight Center in California, has already switched its entire Cessna 172 fleet over to this Swift 100R fuel.
That's a major signal to the market. Flight schools fly thousands and thousands of hours a year. If a big operator like that switches, it proves the concept, and more importantly, it creates a stable source of demand that justifies building out the supply chain.
It's a smart strategy. Capture the volume market first.
It seems to be. And then, just to round it out, there is a third option out there called UL94.
UL94. This is kind of the diet soda of aviation fuel, right?
That's a good way to put it. It's a lower octane, unleaded fuel. It's already available at about 35 airports. And it works great for lower power, lower compression engines, your basic Piper Cub, an older Cessna 150.
But not the big, powerful stuff.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It physically cannot support the high-performance engines. If you were to put UL94 in a turbocharged Beechcraft Baron, you would destroy that engine on the takeoff roll. So it's an important part of the solution, but it's only a partial solution.
So we have the chemistry figured out, at least in the lab. We have the regulatory approval starting to flow.
Right.
But I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a pilot. You've just spent, say, $500,000 on an airplane. Your life, your family's life, depends on that engine. Are you really going to be the first person on your block to pour this new amber mystery juice into your tank just because the FAA put a piece of paper on a website?
And that is the crux of the problem.
Yeah.
You've hit on what I call the infrastructure of trust. And this is where the story gets really, really good. Because to build that trust, you can't just run an engine on a test stand in a lab.
You have to fly it in the real world.
You have to fly it. And that brings us to the AOPA, Baron.
AOPA being the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association.
Right. They're the biggest advocacy group for pilots. They knew that skepticism in their community was sky high. Pilots are conservative by nature, and for good reason. We don't like change when change involves gravity.
So what did they do?
So AOPA went out and bought a 1966 Beechcraft Baron C-55.
Now, this isn't just some little trainer plane. A Baron is a serious machine. Twin engine, 6 seats, fast, complex.
It's a hot rod. It has 2 big Continental IO-520 engines. And they decided to turn this airplane into a flying science experiment. They devised a real-world, head-to-head A/B test.
How did they set it up?
The left engine would run exclusively on the new, unleaded GMI G100UL. The right engine would stay on the old-school leaded 100LL.
The left engine is the future, the right engine is the past. I like the symbolism there.
Exactly. And they didn't baby it. They flew it hard. Over 200 hours of real-world flying. Cross-country trips, flying in the summer heat of Arizona, the cold of the Midwest, high-altitude airports in Colorado. They documented everything.
Okay, so the results. This is what everyone wants to know. First, performance. Does the unleaded engine feel different? Does it cough? Does it sputter? Does it run rough?
And that is the single biggest headline from their entire year-long test. It feels exactly the same. The pilots reported that on startup, takeoff, climb, cruise, if you were to cover up the engine gauges, you absolutely could not tell which engine was which.
That's a huge relief right there. No difference is a win.
No difference is a massive win. But the data they collected from their engine monitors showed something even better. This new unleaded fuel actually has a slightly higher energy density. It packs more punch per gallon.
Wait, really? So you get better gas mileage?
You do. When they ran the engine's lean of peak, which is a fuel-saving technique pilots use, the unleaded engine on the left burned about half a gallon per hour less than the leaded engine on the right to produce the exact same horsepower.
Half a gallon an hour. On a twin-engine plane, that's a gallon per hour. Fuel is, what, $6, $7 a gallon? Over the life of a plane, that is thousands and thousands of dollars in savings.
It adds up fast. And the plane was faster. The true airspeed on otherwise identical flights increased by 2 to 3 knots when running on the unleaded fuel.
So hold on, let me get this straight. We have been poisoning the air with lead for 70 years, and it turns out the leaded gas is actually worse from a performance and efficiency standpoint.
In terms of raw energy density, yes. It seems we were holding on to the lead for its octane rating, but we were sacrificing some efficiency to do it. The new aromatic chemical packages they use in these unleaded fuels are incredibly potent.
Okay, so it flies great, maybe even better. But you mentioned earlier that you can't unsmell it. Let's talk about the sensory experience, because pilots are very tactile people. We look at the fuel, we smell the fuel, we touch the fuel.
And this is the part that gets a little weird. If you've been around airports, you know that 100LL avgas is a clear, bright blue. It's dyed that color for identification.
And it has a very distinct smell, almost sweet.
It is. It smells like a solvent, but it's a sweet, almost nostalgic smell for pilots. The G100UL is not blue. It's a yellowish amber color.
Like car gas.
A bit darker, actually. The AOPA pilots described it as looking like apple juice. And the smell, well, the most common description in the report was that it smells like turpentine.
Turpentine. That is not a comforting smell. That smells like you're about to thin some paint.
Well, it's very high in aromatic compounds, which is what gives it that high octane rating. So chemically, it's not that far off. And it behaves differently on your hands. Standard avgas is very dry. It evaporates incredibly fast. If you splash some on your hand, it's gone in seconds, leaving it cold.
Sure.
This unleaded stuff is oily. It's greasy. It lingers on your skin.
And that caused some problems for the AOPA Baron, didn't it? The sort of day-to-day hygiene issues.
It did, because it stays wet and oily. If you spill a little on the wing during refueling and don't wipe it up immediately, it doesn't just evaporate and vanish. It sits there, and it stains the paint. The report has pictures showing how the fuel caps on the left wing of the Baron turned a distinct yellow over the course of the year. The caps on the right wing stayed pristine.
I can just imagine a guy with a pristine $1 million Cirrus. He is not going to be thrilled about yellow stains all over his beautiful white wing.
Not at all. And there was soot.
Yeah.
When they pulled the spark plugs, the plugs from the unleaded engine had a fine black ash on them. Now, the report was clear. It wasn't dangerous. It didn't impede performance, and it cleaned right off with a puff of shop air. But it's different. And in aviation, different is often perceived as scary.
Speaking of scary, we have to talk about the Oshkosh incident. Reading the AOPA report, this feels like the dramatic climax of the movie.
It was a public relations nightmare playing out in real time. So you have to picture the scene. It's EAA AirVenture in Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
The biggest air show in the world.
The biggest in the world. Mecca for pilots. 600,000 people. And the AOPA Baron, this ambassador for the unleaded future, is parked front and center on the main plaza. It's a showpiece.
And it starts leaking fuel.
And it starts leaking fuel from the left wing, the unleaded route.
Oh, no, that is the worst possible thing that could happen.
You couldn't write it. A puddle of amber, turpentine-smelling fuel forming under the wing, right where everyone can see it. And naturally, the rumor mill goes absolutely nuclear. People are standing there pointing, taking pictures, saying, "See, I told you. That new fuel ate through the rubber fuel bladders. It's corrosive. It's going to dissolve our planes from the inside out."
It confirmed every single skeptic's deepest bias instantly.
It did. In that moment, it felt like a complete disaster. The entire project was in jeopardy.
So what was the truth? Did the fuel eat the tank?
Well, AOPA did exactly the right thing. They didn't speculate. They grounded the plane, flew in mechanics, and they physically removed the rubber fuel bladders from both wings and sent them to a forensic lab for analysis.
They did a full autopsy on the tanks.
A full autopsy, and the results came back. The date stamps on the fuel bladders showed they were manufactured in 1974, 1978.
They were 50 years old.
They were ancient. The rubber was brittle and cracking from age. The lab concluded the leak was caused by old age and some under-torqued bolts on a fitting. It had absolutely nothing to do with the fuel chemistry. In fact, when they pressure tested the bladder from the right wing, the leaded wing, it was leaking too. It just hadn't dripped onto the concrete yet.
So the fuel was completely innocent, but the reputational damage was done.
That's the problem, isn't it? The truth takes 3 weeks and a detailed press release to come out. The image of a leaking airplane spreads around the world in 3 seconds. It just highlights how incredibly fragile the trust is in this whole transition.
And that leads to one more massive hurdle in this infrastructure of trust department. We have to talk about Cirrus.
The Cirrus controversy. This is a big one. Cirrus Aircraft is, the Apple of general aviation. They make the best-selling piston airplane in the world, the SR-22.
The one with the parachute for the whole plane?
That's the one. They're seen as the industry leader. And they issued a service advisory that landed like a bombshell. It explicitly stated that GMI's G100UL is not approved for use in their aircraft, and that if an owner uses it, they may void their factory warranty.
Wow. So even though the FAA, the highest aviation authority in the land, says this fuel is legal and safe to use in your plane,
The manufacturer is saying, if you use it, you're on your own. We won't back you up if something goes wrong.
why? What was their reasoning?
They cited materials compatibility concerns. They're worried about the long-term effects of those aromatic chemicals on all the little parts in the fuel system. The sealants, the O-rings, the glues. They're basically saying GMI's testing wasn't enough for us. We need more data before we sign off.
That puts an aircraft owner in an absolutely impossible position. Do I do the right thing for the environment and risk voiding my very expensive warranty? Or do I keep burning lead and stay protected by the manufacturer?
And 99% of owners are going to choose the warranty. And you can't blame them. Until Cirrus and the other big manufacturers give their blessing, mass adoption is going to be severely throttled.
So we've got the fuel, we've got the planes, we've got the drama. Now let's get into the weeds, because this is where it gets really complicated. Section 5, logistics. Because I think people assume that once a fuel is approved, you just call the tanker truck and fill up the big underground tank at the airport.
If only it were that simple. This is where we look at the guidance from NATA, the National Air Transportation Association. They represent the FBOs, the fixed base operators who actually sell the fuel.
The gas stations of the airport.
Exactly. And they published this detailed guide on how to transition a fuel tank from 100 LL to an unleaded alternative. And reading it,
Yeah.
it just sounds like a logistical and financial nightmare for an airport manager.
Okay, walk us through it. I'm the manager of a small municipal airport. I have a 10,000-gallon tank of 100 low lead. I want to switch to unleaded. Can I just wait until the tank is almost empty and then fill it up with the new stuff?
Absolutely not. That is the cardinal sin. You cannot mix these fuels in the storage infrastructure. The lead residue from the old fuel will contaminate the new fuel. So the guidance says first you have to drain the tank completely.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then you have to have a specialized crew come in and physically clean the sludge and residue out of the bottom of the tank. Then you have to flush the entire system.
Define flush. What does that entail?
It means you have to pump the new, clean, unleaded fuel through all the pipes, the pumps, and the hoses that run from the tank to the fuel truck or the pump. And the NATA standard says you have to use 1.5 times the entire volume of that piping system for the flush.
Wait a minute. You have to pump perfectly good, incredibly expensive new fuel through all the pipes just to wash them. And then what do you do with that flushed fuel? You can't sell it.
You have to downgrade it or dispose of it as contaminated waste. You've just spent hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars on fuel just to use it as soap.
That sounds incredibly expensive and wasteful.
It is. And you're not done. Then you have to replace every single filter in the system. The filter elements, they act like sponges for tetraethyl lead. If you run clean, unleaded fuel through a filter that has seen leaded gas, the filter will actually leach the lead back into the clean fuel.
So you could do everything else right, but if you forget one filter, you're still selling contaminated fuel.
Precisely. It has to be a top-to-bottom hygiene overhaul.
So you do all this. You clean the tank, you flush the pipes, you change the filters. Now you're finally ready to sell gas, but now you have a new problem.
Now you have the safety problem of misfueling.
We talked about the colors, blue for leaded, amber for unleaded.
Right. But just imagine the real-world scenario. It's a busy Saturday afternoon at the airport. You have a 19-year-old line service technician, the kid who's actually pumping the gas. He's been working for 8 hours in the sun. He's tired. And now his airport has 2 different 100-octane fuels. One truck has a blue hose for 100 LL, the other has a yellow hose for G100 UL. And maybe there's a third pump over there with UL94, the low-octane stuff.
I see where this is going.
A pilot lands in a high-performance, turbocharged Piper Mirage. That plane needs 100 octane. Whether it's the old leaded or the new unleaded, it must have 100. If that line kid is distracted and accidentally grabs the hose for the 94-octane UL94 and fills that plane up,
The pilot takes off, firewalls the throttle, and boom.
the engine detonates catastrophically. The plane crashes. Misfueling isn't an inconvenience, it's a life-or-death issue. So the NATA guidance is obsessed with new clapboards, different shaped nozzles, rigorous training, color coding. They are terrified of the wrong fuel going in the wrong hole during this messy transition period.
Now, what about the politics of this? Because I know there are local communities, especially in California, that are just done waiting. Santa Clara County, which runs that Reed Hillview Airport, basically told the FAA, we're banning the sale of leaded gas, period. Can they even do that?
And that is the legal battleground of the century. It brings us to the wonderful world of FAA grant assurances.
This sounds like boring legal stuff, but it's actually the weapon the FAA uses to maintain control over every airport in the country.
It is their most powerful tool. For decades, whenever an airport has accepted federal money from the FAA for a new runway, a new taxiway, even just a fence, they have to sign a contract. In that contract are the grant assurances.
And one of them, Grant Assurance 22A, is the key here.
It is. It says, essentially, you must operate this airport for the public benefit, and you cannot unjustly discriminate against types of aeronautical activity.
And the FAA's interpretation of that has always been, you can't ban the fuel that a significant portion of the aircraft fleet needs to fly safely.
Correct. The FAA's historical stance has been, if the national fleet needs lead to operate, you must allow the sale of leaded gas. So when Santa Clara County banned it, they were in direct violation of that assurance.
And the FAA came down on them hard.
Initially, they launched an investigation, a huge standoff. But then the EPA's endangerment finding happened, and the entire ground shifted. Now, the FAA is in a very awkward position, so they issued a new rule, a brand new one called Grant Assurance 40.
What does number 40 say?
It's essentially a stopgap measure. It explicitly prohibits airports from restricting the availability of a 100 LL during this transition phase until a replacement is, and this is the key phrase, widely commercially available.
So it's the FAA basically saying to the local governments, look, we hear you. We are going to unleaded, we promise. But you absolutely cannot jump the gun. If every airport bans lead tomorrow, the national transportation system collapses because the unleaded supply chain isn't ready yet.
It's a federal preemption to prevent chaos. They're saying, hold your horses, we're working on it, but we have to do this in an orderly fashion. It's an uneasy truce, to say the least.
So bringing all these threads together into a path forward, we are in early 2026. What happens next on the timeline?
Right now, we are squarely in phase 1, that the EGL documents call the messy middle. We have a couple of fuels that are legally authorized, like JMIs and SWIFTs, but distribution is incredibly spotty. We have some early adopters like flight schools switching over, but most private owners are holding back because of the warranty issues.
And what about that government-led track, the PAFI initiative?
Their testing is scheduled to wrap up around the spring of 2027. If the PAFI fuel candidate, the one from Leondell Basel, gets the big fleet-wide approval, That could be a game changer. That brings a massive global chemical company into the market. They know how to produce and move liquid at scale.
So 2027 is a major pivot point to watch. And from there, it's a sprint to 2030.
2030 is the hard deadline for what they call a lead-free national airspace system. By then, the expectation is that the unleaded fuels will be widely available, the manufacturer warranty issues will be resolved, and we should see leaded gas disappearing from the pumps entirely in the lower 48 states.
Except Alaska.
Except Alaska, they get that 2-year extension to the end of 2032.
So why does Alaska always get a special exception in these things?
It's a combination of physics and logistics. In the lower 48, aviation is often a convenience or a hobby. In Alaska, it's a lifeline. It's how food and medicine get to remote villages.
It's the only way in or out from many places.
For many places, yes. But their fuel supply chain is insane. They have to put the fuel on massive barges in Seattle in the summer, float it up the coast to Anchorage, then transfer it to smaller river barges, float it hundreds of miles upriver to a remote tank farm where it might sit at 40 degrees below zero for 6 months before it's used.
And we don't know for sure if the new apple juice fuel will turn into a slushy at 40 below.
We are pretty sure it won't, but pretty sure isn't good enough when a village's survival depends on it. They need that extra 2 years to do extensive cold weather stability testing and to figure out the logistics of cleaning out that very long and complex supply chain. You can't risk a village freezing because their fuel supply gelled up.
That makes perfect sense. So, while we're in this messy middle, waiting for 2030, is there anything that airports and pilots can do right now to mitigate the problem? If you're a mayor and you can't legally ban the fuel yet, are you helpless?
No, and this is important. The FAA guidance strongly suggests practical mitigation strategies. The biggest one is relocating run-up areas.
Explain what that is.
Before a piston plane takes off, the pilot taxis to a designated spot on the airport, holds the brakes, and revs the engine to a high RPM to test the magnetos and other systems. In that moment, it's blasting a highly concentrated cloud of leaded exhaust directly backwards.
And usually that spot is right at the end of the runway?
Which is often right next to the airport fence, which is often right next to a residential backyard or a school playground. The FAA is saying, this is a simple fix. Move the run-up spot. Move it to a more central part of the airfield. Let the wind dilute and disperse the exhaust before it ever reaches the community.
That is such a simple, low-tech, common-sense fix.
It is. They also recommend that air traffic control minimize idle times on the ground. And crucially, airports can and should start offering UL-94 for the smaller planes that can use it. Every gallon of unleaded fuel you sell to a Cessna 150 is 1 less gallon of leaded fuel being burned over that community.
So it's not an all-or-nothing situation. You can make incremental progress.
Exactly. Progress, not perfection, is the goal right now.
As we wrap this up, I just keep coming back to the story of that AOPA Baron. It flew for 200 hours on unleaded fuel. The engine was cleaner internally, the plane was faster, it burned less gas. The technology works.
The engineering problem is solved. That's the big moment from reading all these documents. We're not waiting for some magical breakthrough in chemistry. We have the molecule. We have multiple molecules that work.
We're waiting for the bureaucracy, the lawyers, the insurance companies, and the supply chain to catch up.
We are waiting for the infrastructure of trust to be built, to catch up with the infrastructure of engineering. It's a messy, necessary, and incredibly expensive bridge to cross, but for the first time in 50 years, it really feels like we are crossing it.
It really reminds me of other big technological shifts, like the transition from horses to cars or from leaded car gas to unleaded. It's painful and chaotic while you're in the middle of it, but 10 years from now, we will all look back and say, I can't believe we used to intentionally spray lead all over our own houses.
And we'll probably still miss the sweet smell of the old avgas. Just a little bit. Nostalgia is a funny thing.
I'm not so sure I'll miss the turpentine smell, though.
No, probably not.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. We've talked about warranties and regulations and logistics, but think about this from a philosophical level. If a new fuel works perfectly in the engine, the physics says yes, the chemistry says yes, the real-world flight test says yes, but using it voids your warranty, does the fuel really work? In the real world, where law and liability matter as much as physics, is a technological solution actually a solution if the legal and financial systems around it reject it?
That is the question at the heart of these next 4 years. Until the paper matches the chemistry, the plane in many cases stays on the ground or keeps burning lead.
Something to think about the next time you hear a small plane buzzing overhead. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.
Fly safe.